G'day legends, I hope that you're well and having a great week. Now we're going to talk more about these border crossings as more information has come to light and me doing a little bit more research into these groups and exactly what has happened. But we'll also look at some maps. Over the last 48 hours, the propaganda machines and the basement kids with the blue ticks again have been running absolutely wild. At this point you'd either think Kiev or Moscow is about to be occupied, both of which we know are not. To get any idea what is happening, it is impossible currently with the fog of war, and the mere suggestion to anyone's counter view is absolutely the most offensive thing you could say online, and you will be shunned for it. But we're going to go over what I'm seeing and what led to this, possibly the next actions, and some of the information here will be disproven in time or I've interpreted incorrectly. So with every news source, every YouTuber, take with a grain of salt, including me, including everyone. And you should branch out and look at different types. But we're going to have a look at the maps that show some very different photos. So let's look at this and talk about what we know so far. So of course we have Ukraine, the capital of Kiev. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 14. Now, what we're seeing on the front line is really no changes. So in and around Bakhmut over the past couple of days, nothing really since that occupation there. But where we have seen is in Belgorod. So just to give an idea, here's Kiev, and we come in up in this region. Now, we did see an update yesterday that showed that the Ukrainians had pushed into this region. Now, we see this small grey area here. Now, Deep State has come and has shown a larger area here, having Glatovo and Kozinka in this. Now, this is more similar to what we saw on the Rybar map yesterday, as I showed those two maps and said that there was a difference between them, being the Rybar showing a lot more taken than the Deep State did. But we're going to have a look at some other maps, both on the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, and just show what exactly they're showing. So might be a little bit all over the place today, but here we have the Rybar map. Yesterday, the Rybar map in this darker red or the more hot red area here is what it was showing that Ukraine had taken. And here's Kozinka here and Glatovo. Now this shows a more zoomed in version than what we have on the map here, but it is shown that it has repelled the forces out and that they're back to the existing border, this being the border of Ukraine here. Now the ISW, and this is the region here, is not showing any change. So it's actually zoomed it out a little bit. This is Kozinka here and Glatovo will pop up in and around here. Now the reason I have this zoomed out is there is a Ukrainian map floating around showing this. Now this may be a little bit hard to show actually what is going on, but this green area here is this one through Kozinka here, and then this one here, this is coming out near the Shchenskinova, or however that would be pronounced in here. And what we're going to have to look at, we're going to have to look at the border shape to pick where this one is. So we see this sort of loop around, go flat and then up on a 45 degree. So what we're talking about is this region in here. Now that is not being shown on the ISW. It's not being shown on, because this is this area here we're talking about, it's not being shown on the Deep State, and it's definitely not being shown then on the Rybar Russian sources. So it's very difficult to know exactly what is happening in this region. As well, we have War Mapper. I actually named these slightly incorrectly. So War Mapper 1 was from yesterday, so yellow occupied by Ukraine, and the grey zone is contested region, and then War Mapper 2 by my numbering is showing a lot more. So of course it's showing occupied territory to be significantly more and the grey zone to be significantly more as well. So what is actually going on, we don't really know. Now we're just going to talk a little bit about Bakhmut, as well as there has been some interesting information come out from an hour-long interview with Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner PMC. Now, this is the interview here, and this clip was brought out by War Translated. So today I think Ukraine is one of the strongest armies, saying that they have a high organisation level and high level of training and a high level of reconnaissance. They have diverse equipment, and moreover they operate many systems. Soviet, NATO, anything with similar success, and they feel very philosophically about losses they are taking. From then, everything goes to reach the supreme goal, like us in the Great War. Now saying in this that the goal is to defend their land. So this is why the morale is typically higher on the Ukrainian side, and that sort of warrior spirit is they're not going to a foreign nation to invade, they are defending their actual land, their homes, and like us in the Great Patriotic War, talking about World War II. But more technological and organised than that conflict. This is what we got with the demilitarisation of the Ukrainian army. Now, we're saying here, and I've seen people pointing out, that Prigozhin needs to say that Ukraine is at a higher level of training. People are like, why would he say that? Why would he not say that they are bad? Now, Prigozhin has just had the success of taking over the city of Bakhmut. What he needs to say isn't, hey, we were fighting, these forces here train. He needs to say we're fighting the best army in the world and still had success over that. And that's the reason Russia is having such a hard time. Not saying Russia is just disorganised and having a bad time because we can't do proper combined arms and manoeuvre warfare. He can't say that. He needs to say we're fighting because we are fighting the toughest military in the world. This is why we're having so much so little success in areas against it. So by crediting the Ukrainian forces, he is also crediting the Russian forces for having such a hard time, if that makes sense. Prigozhin plays a lot of these PSYOP games. He is the king of PSYOP warfare, at least publicly at that extension. Now, Rybar has taken out a few bits and pieces from this that I did find interesting, remembering that Rybar is a very pro-Russian source and does have some things clearly wrong day to day. This was some interpretation from them of this interview with some quotes as well. But by June the 1st, with the backlash of up to 10 days, PM says should as correctly transfer Bakhmut to units of the Russian armed force. We've spoken about the Wagner is pulling out by June 1 and will be redeployed, maybe on the front line and maybe back overseas. If the Russian Ministry of Defense is unable to do this, then this fact, according to Prigozhin, will discredit the Russian armed forces and make PMCs more combat ready than regular troops. And from the point of view of public administration, this is incorrect. Now, this as well, I think Prigozhin may know that the Russian Ministry of Defense may not be able to hold this. And in turn, at the end of the day, Wagner PMC and war is his business. And he needs a war to be in business, to make money. He may know that they can't hold it and that, the Russian Ministry of Defense may have to, fund him again to go back into this area. Again, I think everything Prigozhin does is playing at a game. Continuing, at the beginning of the siege of Bakhmut, there were 35,000 fighters in the ranks of PMCs. For all the time of the special military operation, 50,000 prisoners were recruited. Amongst the prisoners, 20% of them, 10,000 prisoners, died in battle, and another 10,000 full-time PMC fighters also died. So a 20% attrition rate is super high, even if it is significantly more than that. But this is saying that 20,000 died in Bakhmut or from the special military operation, but the most we've seen the PMCs really involved is in Bakhmut. So that is a very high number and could be significantly higher than that. As we know, both sides don't release, the numbers, or the numbers they do release can have some large fudge factor in that, but I can't go down that path because I'll get myself in trouble again. But according to the results of the battle for Bakhmut, the loss of the AFU, the Armed Forces of Ukraine, killed 50,000 people, wounded 50 to 70,000 people. And these numbers are similar to what the West is saying and Ukraine is saying that Wagner lost and the Russian forces lost in Bakhmut. I've heard numbers up to 100,000 as well. So again, I just put this out because I thought it was interesting to hear him talk about that and Rybar sort of take away from that. But we're going to go back to talking about these cross-border operations, also known as the Incursion, and what we're going to look at is the British MOD and the Russian MOD statements about this. So the British MOD, between the 19th and the 22nd of May 23, Russian security forces highly likely clashed with partisans in at least 3 locations within Russia's Belgorod Oblast, near the Ukrainian border. The identity of the partisans remains unconfirmed, but the Russian anti-regime groups claimed responsibility. We're going to talk about who these are and what's going on just in a second. The most serious incident took place near the town of Graveron, which we've just talked about, as well as small arms firefights. There was an uptick in drone or indirect fire attacks near the incidents. Russia has evacuated several villages and has deployed extra security forces in the area, said to be the FSB from Moscow, but that is sort of unconfirmed at this point, as we've seen some other groups working too. Russia is facing an increasingly serious multi-domain security threat in its border regions, with losses of combat aircraft, IEDs, attacks on rail lines, and now direct partisan action. Russia will almost certainly use these incidents to support the official narrative that it is the victim in this war. And this rail line we're talking about is what we reported on in Crimea the other day. Partisan actions blowing up the railway line there and derailing at least 3 to 5 carriages full of grain. Now, the Russian MOD statement, the Kiev regime, having suffered a defeat in the city of Artemovsk, being Bakhmut, switched to the implementation of actions against the civilian population. And this has been what Russia has been saying since 2014, or even pre-14 as well, in that way of terrorist actions against civilian population. Anyway, yesterday, after intensive artillery shelling on the Konzinka International Checkpoint, as well as a number of the civilian facilities in the Gavaronsk district in the Belgorod region, a unit of a Ukrainian nationalist formation invaded the territory of the Russian Federation. In the course of the counter operation, the nationalist formations were blocked and defeated by airstrikes, artillery fire, and the active actions of cover units of the state border of the Western Military District. The remnants of the nationalists were driven back to the territory of Ukraine, where they continued to be hit by fire until they were completely eliminated. More than 70 Ukrainian 4 armoured fighting vehicles and 5 pickups have been destroyed. And we're going to look over that more in a second and who these groups are and some of the people involved in this. Now, there are 2 groups that have claimed these attacks: the Russian Volunteer Corps, the RVC, and the Freedom of the Russian Legion. Now, Kiev has denied any role to play and has said all the attackers are Russian citizens. Now, let's talk about who these groups actually are. What we do know is the Russian Volunteer Corps, the RVC, are aligned with Ukrainian forces in their battle against Russia. And what we know from the Ukraine's military intelligence spokesman, Andriy Yusov, yesterday to CNN, he said that the group is part of the defence and security forces in Ukraine, but also said in Russia they are acting as independent entities. Now, throughout this conflict since 14, there has been state-backed militias with ideologies sometimes at the forefront of operations, giving both Ukraine and Russia a level of separation from the state and plausible deniability. Although some of these groups have been soaked into the regular forces as a way to take advantage of their experience and capability, but also to police their actions as more eyes than ever are scrutinising. Now, the RVC was founded by Denis Nikitin, who has been described by the Foreign Times as a Moscow-born far-right militia leader, a notorious extremist, and the Telegraph described him as a Russian neo-Nazi hooligan, and Reuters as a far-right Russian national. Due to what is being reported as far-right activity in Europe, he has got a 10-year ban from Europe's Schengen zone. Now, Nikitin was born in Russia. He lived in Germany as a teenager and moved to Ukraine in 2017. Now, from photographs said to be a trophy BTR-82, which was said to be taken from the Russian forces in Belgorod by the RVC, Reuters has said Reuters was able to identify one of the men as Ilya Bogdanov, a Russian national who received Ukrainian citizenship in 2015 after fighting for Kiev against Russian-backed forces in the east. And this is these photographs here of this gentleman here, and as well this photograph here at the Passport Control Office, Western weapon, and driving this BTR-82 that is a trophy from the Russian forces with the patch on the front that we saw either on the shoulder or the front of their plate carriers from yesterday. So maybe they're all ethnically Russian, but some are definitely Ukrainian citizens. Now, the RVC mission statement posted recently on Telegram says, "We Russian volunteers living in Ukraine have decided to take up arms and create a military formation, the Russian Volunteer Corps, RVC, so that together with our Ukrainian comrades in arms, we can defend their homeland, which shelters us, and continue the fight against Putin's criminal regime. To divert the attention of the population from internal political problems, the regime offered society another bond, the concept of the Russian world, although for some reason it decided to build it on the territory of Ukraine and not in Moscow, which has not been part of such a world for a long time." Now, the Freedom of Russian Legion, being the second one we're going to talk about, is no different. It's said to be formed from a company of Russians who defected to Ukraine earlier in this war that formed in the spring, saying they oppose the Russian regime of Vladimir Putin and its invasion of Ukraine, and is reportedly one of the many raised international legions, although this has also been denied. Now, pro-Russian channels and Russian media have made several claims that the group does not exist, but is actually a Ukrainian PR project run by Ukrainian intelligence in some sort of false flag operation to gain support and give a buffer for these cross-border operations. Now, the Moscow Times has reported there might be some fighters, but whether it is organised in the way it's presented remains an open question. question. It is clearer with the International Legion. There is a large number, and they did take part in combat, for example, in Irpin, Severodonetsk, and Lysychansk, but little is known about the freedom of Russia being in the Legion. Now, silly as it sounds and given the credibility of the sources, this could be paid off easily. But could this be an intelligence-run operation with backing from Western intelligence services as well? Absolutely it could be. To what extent? Well, no one knows, but it could be from 0 to 100. We have no idea. But don't think for a second that intelligence services have no role to play in the wider conflict. What do you think, that they're going to sit out the largest war in 80 years? So what has actually happened? Well, 36 hours ago, we saw a cross-border operation into the Belgorod region, said to be with several armoured vehicles and 80 soldiers. What happened beyond this? Well, that's kind of unknown and is being reported vastly different. We'll talk about that. We know that Moscow has deployed what they say is a counter operation and has said that the forces were deployed from Moscow's FSB, but that is yet to be confirmed. Now, Russian sources say that the operation is complete and those who crossed the borders were liquidated, along with releasing photographs of vehicles and Western weapons taken, graffitied and destroyed, as well as images of soldiers seemingly unalived, although interestingly these photographs were in Ukrainian digital camouflage, not the multicams we saw in the initial videos, and with no clear wounds, no way to geolocate this at this point, so we don't actually know. But we will look at some of the vehicles here and some of the Western vehicles also destroyed and captured. So here we have an MRAP with the Z's on the front as well, said to be captured, and this is a second one said to be captured as well. Now we have this mortar position we've talked about here as well. This gentleman we spoke about yesterday, who was also seen yesterday but also in the Bryansk region, and this is the mortar line that is said to be set up. We'll probably talk about that more in a second. Here is 2 Humvees that have said to be destroyed. Now, people have claimed that these images could have been set up as well, but we're going to leave it at that. And here is another Humvee transporter looked to be destroyed as well, with Bakhmut on the side of it, as well as we saw on this, and this was at the border checkpoint. This says welcome to Bakhmut, with one of these foreign fighters crossing here as well. Now, could this be sort of some foreshadowing? We're unsure of why it says welcome to Bakhmut on this region as well. The Ukrainian sources are saying the operation is still ongoing and have pushed further into the Belgorod region, capturing some areas and digging in positions, like we've seen on the Ukrainian side maps, and we have seen with digging in those mortars. Now, digging in full, sort of stage 3 pits, like fighting pits, I haven't seen any of that other than claims. It's also claimed that their forces had not been killed. Now, this is a chat from the RVC Telegram chat here, and it says, "We do not know what columns of equipment Mr. has destroyed in his reports, but the Russian volunteer, the RVC, there is no corp losses regarding the photos of the saboteurs walking around the network. Our fighters wear cartoons, not pixel." So the cartoons are being the multicam, not the pixel camouflage, and saying that they are all, safe and they've taken no losses. Now, what did this mission strive to accomplish? Well, to me, this isn't very clear yet. A group that size, no matter how well trained or equipped, unless a small in and out mission, will eventually be swallowed up in continuing to push. This isn't Call of Duty. Eventually you need more ammo, more water, sleep, and will take wounded that will need evac, and a whole range of just limitations of human beings. Now, was it to draw attention away from recent Russian successes in Bakhmut? And yes, I know Wagner took months and huge casualties, but it can be sold as a success. But even if changing the media from a loss to a win wasn't the initial idea, it has definitely worked. I googled just Ukraine, nothing else, on an incognito chat, and the top stories are all Belgorod raid, anti-Putin Russian raid, and US distances itself from Belgorod. So, from the BBC, CNN, all of this, it has caused it to take that out of the media and this straight in. Now, was that the initial idea? I don't know. It's what a lot of people claim it was, but it's definitely had that effect. Not only is Bakhmut out of the media and socials, it is showing an embarrassingly, basically undefended crossing into Russian land that had taken place and is going everywhere. And this being absolute PR and morale goldmine, as well for the possibility of recruiting more Russian volunteers and gaining more Ukrainian support. Could it be testing the waters, seeing both Russia and the West's response to a cross-border operation? I think this is more likely sending a group with a degree of separation and plausible deniability from your state forces with a few Western weapons but nothing too major, and see what fallout it brings. And so far, it's been very successful. Now, one of the big things this has achieved is the proof that the Russian border in areas is not well defended, and this was a PR PR nightmare for Russia, therefore forcing Russian forces to now deploy more forces and equipment to defend hundreds more kilometres of border, now potentially thinning out forces even further. Plus, whether pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian, it got a lot more eyes back onto this war, which is currently in a stage of stalemate as people await for these possible counter-offensive. Now, the worst thing possible for the Ukrainian military support isn't pro-Russian accounts and people in the West or people leaning towards Russia. It is if publicity drops. Any publicity is good publicity, and as long as people are discussing it, arguing and fighting, Western governments and private donations will keep rolling in, support will be high, and of course political figures can appeal to people on a popular subject. Is war a racket? Yes. But legends, that's it for me. I hope you're having a great time. Look after yourself. I know I might not be that upbeat. I'm still super jet lagged. It's like 6 a.m. in Australia or something at the moment, and I've been up all day. But if you'd like to support me, there's links down below, because every single thing I'm doing is getting demonetized and restricted, and 50% of the audience hate me at certain different times, and YouTube hate me 100% of the time. So look after yourselves, have a great day, and I'll speak to you soon. Okay, thank you, bye-bye.